The metallic taste in the air was the first warning. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't fire. It was the taste of his own death. Vasily Ignatenko was just 25 when he answered the final fire alarm of his life. He thought he was fighting a roof fire. In reality, he was the only thing standing between a burning reactor and the destruction of the entire European continent. This is the story of the man who killed himself to save the world. This is Monochrome Documentaries. We bring history's overlooked heroes to center stage. April 25, 1986. The last quiet hours of Pripyat, a city built to represent the future. It stood beside the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant and was home to nearly 50,000 people, a population filled with scientists, engineers, workers, and their families, most of them young. Pripyat was clean, modern, and young. Life there felt stable, predictable. Among them was Vasily Ivanovich Ignatenko. At just 25, he was a senior sergeant, a squad leader in Pripyat's paramilitary fire brigade number 6. Born on March 13, 1961, he was a strong, capable young man, married to the love of his life, Lyudmila. Their whole life was wrapped up in Pripyat. They lived in a small apartment provided to the plant's workers and their families, a home filled with the simple joys of newlyweds, shared meals, quiet evenings, and dreams for the future. They were expecting their first child. For Vasily, being a firefighter was more than a job. It was a duty. It was a life built on routine and trusting the guy next to you with your life. But the dangers he trained for were conventional. He was prepared for smoke, for collapsing structures, for the blistering heat of a chemical blaze. He was a master of the visible enemy. That fateful night, Vasily was on duty at the fire station. The hours leading up to 1 a.m. on April 26th ticked by unremarkable, filled with the routine of any firehouse after dark. Just 4 kilometers away, a safety test at reactor number 4 was underway, a test so routine the plant's director hadn't even bothered to show up. Ironically, it was a test designed to make the plant safer, but a series of catastrophic errors and fatal design flaws were converging. Under pressure, the operators pushed the reactor into an unstable state. Power levels first plummeted, then began to surge uncontrollably. At 1:23 in the morning, 2 massive explosions blew the 2,000-ton lid clean off the reactor, shooting a column of fire and incandescent material a kilometer into the night sky. The core was open. The atom was unleashed. 6 minutes later, at 1:29 a.m., the alarm bell screamed through Fire Brigade number 6. The call was chillingly simple: a fire at the power plant, a roof fire. There was no mention of an explosion, no mention of radiation, no mention of the apocalypse that had just been born down the road. For Vasily Ignatenko and the 13 other men in his brigade who scrambled into their trucks, it was just another fire. They pulled on their simple canvas uniforms, their standard-issue helmets and gloves, and raced toward the pillar of flame, completely unaware they were driving towards their own death. The 4-kilometer drive from Pripyat to the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant was a journey into a nightmare. Through the windows of the roaring fire engine, the men could see it. This was no ordinary fire. A strange, eerie blue glow lit up the sky above the reactor, the air itself being ionized by a colossal release of energy. The night sky pulsed with an unnatural, mesmerizing aurora. Upon arrival, the scene was one of utter devastation. The northern side of Unit 4 was a mangled ruin. The roof was simply gone. What was left of the building was hemorrhaging fire and black smoke. Scattered across the remaining sections of the roof and the surrounding grounds were chunks of a black, glassy material, glowing with a malevolent, cherry-red heat. It was the graphite moderator from the reactor's core. Each piece was a lump of concentrated death, emitting levels of radiation so high they could deliver a lethal dose in minutes. The firefighters, including Vasily Ignatenko, had no way of knowing this. Their dosimeters, the devices that measure radiation, were either scarce or only capable of reading low levels, making them practically useless in this inferno. In the absence of information, they fell back on their training and their duty. The mission was simple: put out the fires. The immediate threat was the fire spreading from the destroyed Unit 4 to the adjacent Unit 3. A fire in Unit 3's turbine hall, fed by leaking oil, was raging. If that fire took hold, it could trigger a wider, more catastrophic disaster. The world was unknowingly balanced on a razor's edge, and these few men were the only thing holding it back. Around 1:50 a.m., Vasily and his fellow firefighters, including Lieutenants Viktor Kibanok and Volodymyr Pravik, made a fateful decision. The internal water pipes in the building had been severed, making it impossible to pump water to the roof. They would have to go up themselves. They began the grueling climb up the fire escape of the neighboring Unit 3, manually hauling heavy canvas hoses up to the roof, 20 stories high. As they stepped onto that roof, they stepped into another world. They were standing at the epicenter of the worst nuclear disaster in human history. The air was thick with radioactive smoke and dust. It tasted of metal, a bitter, unfamiliar tang that coated their mouths and throats. They felt a strange sensation on their skin, like pins and needles. They were surrounded by the glowing graphite, some pieces as large as bowling balls. Following protocol, and with no other options, they did the only thing they knew how to do. They fought the fire. On the roof of the Chernobyl power plant, a small group of men waged a primitive war against a futuristic foe. They were armed with canvas hoses and raw courage, fighting an enemy they couldn't see, smell, or truly feel. An enemy that was actively dissolving their bodies from the inside out. Vasily Ignatenko and his comrades worked with desperate ferocity. They stomped on smaller pieces of burning graphite, kicking the glowing, lethal debris off the roof with their standard-issue boots. They used their hands, protected only by thin gloves, to pick up and cast aside chunks of the reactor's core. They aimed their hoses at the fires raging across the bitumen roof, the superheated tar bubbling and releasing plumes of toxic, radioactive smoke that they inhaled with every ragged breath. Their simple canvas uniforms offered no protection from the storm of gamma and neutron radiation lashing their bodies. The radiation levels on that roof were staggering. A dose of 5 gray is fatal for about half the people who receive it. These men were absorbing that much and more in a matter of minutes. Their fate was sealed the moment they set foot up there, but in their ignorance, they fought on. The Soviet protocol was clear. You fight the fire until it's out or until you're ordered to stop. No order came. The lie that this was a simple fire was still the official reality. To retreat would have been unthinkable, and so they continued their hopeless battle. The radiation, however, was beginning to make its presence known. They probably mistook the initial symptoms for heat exhaustion or smoke inhalation. A wave of nausea, a debilitating weakness, a pounding headache. Around 2:15 a.m., less than an hour after they arrived, the first man went down. One of Vasily's friends suddenly collapsed, his body racked with violent, uncontrollable vomiting. He was followed moments later by others. This wasn't smoke inhalation. This was the body's immediate, violent reaction to a catastrophic cellular assault. This was acute radiation syndrome, ARS, taking hold. Even as he felt the same waves of nausea and vertigo washing over him, Vasily's sense of duty took over. He and other firefighters helped carry their fallen comrades down the long, treacherous fire escape. But then Vasily did something that cemented his legacy. After getting his friends to the ambulances, he turned around and went back up. He returned to that radioactive hell to continue the fight. For another 20 to 30 minutes, he stood on that roof, coordinating the hoses, battling the flames, ignoring the poison that was coursing through him. He was a commander, and he would not abandon his post. He was fighting an enemy that had already won, but in his defiance, he was buying the world precious time. The fires on the turbine hall roof, if left unchecked, would have spread to Unit 3. The consequences of a second major release of radiation from another unit were almost unimaginable. Vasily and his fellow firefighters, in their final hour of strength, held the line. They were the thin wall of flesh and bone that stood between the initial disaster and a continent-wide cataclysm. But the human body can only take so much. Finally, overwhelmed by vertigo and a profound weakness, Vasily Ignatenko could no longer stand. Helped down the fire escape by his remaining comrades, he was half carried, half dragged to an ambulance. By 2:35 a.m., barely an hour after the initial alarm, he was admitted to Pripyat Hospital. It was in the sterile, chaotic corridors of the hospital that the true nature of the enemy began to reveal itself. The initial diagnosis was smoke inhalation and thermal burns, but the symptoms didn't match. Vasily's skin began to turn a deep, alarming red, a so-called nuclear tan, caused by intense beta radiation burns. The metallic taste in his mouth wouldn't go away, and then came the vomiting, relentless and uncontrollable. He wasn't alone. The hospital was quickly overwhelmed by a flood of firefighters and plant workers, all showing the same terrifying symptoms. They were young, strong men, reduced to shivering, retching specters in a matter of hours. The doctors and nurses were bewildered. They had no frame of reference for this. They continued to treat it as a conventional accident, unaware that their patients were saturated with radiation. For Vasily, lying on a hospital cot, the shift from a man doing his job to a victim of some unknown horror was crystallizing. The pain was unlike any burn he had ever imagined. His skin began to peel and blister. He looked at his comrades, men he'd shared jokes with just hours before, and saw his own fate reflected in their swollen faces. This was the moment of realization. This was not a fire you could walk away from. The invisible ghost they had battled on the roof had followed them here. It was inside them. Layered on top of the physical agony was a dawning, bitter sense of betrayal. They had been sent into a nuclear catastrophe with no warning and no protection. The authorities in Pripyat and beyond were paralyzed by indecision and denial, desperate to conceal the scale of the disaster. While Vasily and his comrades were dying, officials were still debating whether to block cars from leaving the city, clinging to the lie that the situation was under control. On May 1st, as the Soviet Union celebrated its May Day parades in Kiev with citizens who were still being kept in the dark, Vasily and the other critically ill firefighters were flown to Hospital No. 6 in Moscow, a facility specializing in radiological injuries. It was a trip built on a sliver of hope, a belief that experts in the capital could fix what was broken. But some things can't be fixed. For Vasily Ignatenko, the ordeal was just beginning. He knew, in a way he couldn't yet fully articulate, that he was already a dead man. History has a habit of forgetting names like Vasily's. We exist to remember them. If you want to help keep these overlooked stories alive, consider subscribing. And if this film moved you, a like helps it reach others who need to know his sacrifice. Hospital number 6 in Moscow was a place for desperate cases, the most advanced facility in the Soviet Union for treating radiation sickness. But what was happening to Vasily Ignatenko and his comrades was beyond the scope of 1986 medicine. They were attempting to treat men whose very cellular structure had been unwritten. His wife, Lyudmila, pregnant with their child, rushed to his side, navigating a bureaucracy of lies and dismissals to be with him. What she witnessed in that hospital room was a slow, agonizing, and complete deconstruction of the man she loved. Her account, captured in Svetlana Alexievich's book, Voices from Chernobyl, is one of the most harrowing testimonies of the disaster's human cost. Acute radiation syndrome isn't a gentle fading away. It's a violent, multi-stage assault. After an initial latency period, where Vasily might have felt slightly better, the full horror began. His immune system collapsed. His bone marrow, the factory of his blood, ceased to function. A desperate bone marrow transplant from his sister was attempted, but it failed. His body rejected the tissue, and with no immune response, infection ran rampant. Lyudmila described how his skin began to crack and slough off. Boils erupted all over his body. With every turn of his head on the pillow, a clump of his hair would be left behind. His internal organs, ravaged by the radiation, began to liquefy. He was producing bloody stools more than 25 times a day, as his digestive tract dissolved. He coughed up pieces of his own lungs and liver. He was disintegrating from the inside out. Through it all, Lyudmila stayed. She bribed nurses for access. She soothed him, cleaned him, and whispered words of love, holding his swollen hand when the doctors forbade it, telling him "I love you" as he slept. In his few lucid moments, the firefighter, the husband, the father-to-be would surface. He asked about their child, the baby he would never see. He told Lyudmila that if it was a boy, they should name him Vasya, and if a girl, Natasha. His death, when it came, was an act of mercy. On May 13, 1986, 18 days after answering that final fateful alarm, Vasily Ignatenko died at the age of 25. His body was so contaminated with radioactive particles that a normal burial was out of the question. The authorities laid him to rest in a sealed zinc coffin, encased in concrete, at the Midinsko Cemetery in Moscow, a place reserved for Chernobyl's heroes and victims. Lyudmila recounted that they couldn't get a single pair of shoes to fit his swollen, broken feet. They buried him barefoot. What was the purpose of such a sacrifice? It was this. In those first critical hours, Vasily Ignatenko and the other first responders stopped the fire from spreading to Unit 3's turbine hall. By giving their lives, they prevented a second disaster that could have dwarfed the first. Their sacrifice bought Europe the time it needed to react, a victory they would never live to see. The legacy of Chernobyl is a scar on the face of the earth. It's etched into the abandoned streets of Pripyat, the ghost city slowly being reclaimed by nature. It's present in the ongoing health crises across Ukraine and Belarus. And it's forever sealed in the concrete sarcophagi of the men buried at Midinsko Cemetery. Vasily Ignatenko was posthumously awarded the Order of the Red Banner by the Soviet Union, and in 2006, the title of Hero of Ukraine, the nation's highest honor. But his true legacy isn't in medals or monuments. It is in the stark human truth of his story. He was a 25-year-old husband, an expectant father, a firefighter who answered a call. He walked into a war he didn't even know was being fought, against an enemy that killed without a sound. He did his duty, not because he was ordered to, but because it was who he was. In the face of the atom's terrifying power, he demonstrated the strength of a human heart. And in his death, he reminds us of the terrible cost of lies, the price of hubris, and the quiet, enduring heroism of those who run toward the fire, even when that fire glows with an unnatural, deadly light. Thanks for watching.